Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm the son of Egon Spangler, Brad Garoon, and I'm here with Jake Ziegler, the son of his father. And today we're going to talk about 1966. But first, happy 100th birthday to Marcello Mastroianni, who is no longer with us. But today, as we're recording this, is his 100th birthday, or would have been. And rest in peace to Maggie Smith, who passed away a couple days yesterday. Big bummer. I was just editing some YouTube stuff for us, and I came across our 1968 rankings where I called out Hot Millions, which was a comedy she did with Peter Ustinov that's pretty funny, and I might rewatch that now just for fun. What Maggie Smith movie would you rewatch?
Gosh, I don't know. I only know her really as McGonagall is like my only kind of point of reference for her because I don't really care about Downton Abbey. So I don't know. Maybe do we have? Wasn't she in the original Murder on the Orient Express?
No, but she was in the original Death on the Nile.
That's probably what I'm thinking of. Do we have that? Is that on our podcast list? Isn't that one you picked for me?
Let's take a look. If it's not, it should be. I freaking love that movie. It is, yeah. It's when we do 1970. You know what? We'll do 1978 pretty soon.
Yeah, let's do that soon because I obviously never did it, and it would be a good time to do that. I mean, I love her as McGonagall. Obviously, the Harry Potter movies are what they're, but I mean, I think she was absolutely just wonderful in that role. And there's so many male professors in those movies, and she's kind of one of the few female professors, and especially one of the few strong female professors in the movie. Because like even the Emma Thompson role, she's kind of like flighty, not as much, and McGonagall just kind of she's just so great in that movie. She's just such a great presence in those movies.
Yeah, really terrific. Actually, the recently departed Angela Lansbury is also in that movie. So they're all that whole cast. There's like almost no one left.
That's really sad.
Yeah, it didn't even come out. Well, I guess almost 50 years ago. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm feeling old all over the place, man. I saw a thing that Avril Lavigne just turned 40. Like, well, that just makes me feel old.
That doesn't make me feel old because I always assumed she was older than me, and that means she's a little younger than me.
There you go.
That's okay. People younger than me turning 40, not the best, but okay. Life goes on. Let's talk about 1966, the films of 1966. Let's start with the movie that I gave to you because I'm not ready to talk about the movie you gave to me just yet. So I gave you, although the one I gave to you is no breeze either. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Wow.
If you want to be like the movie, you could say it like 50 more times.
Well, I'd have to sing it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so this is Mike Nichols' directorial debut, which I always found pretty weird because he was known for comedy before that. He had an improv partnership with Elaine May, where they did very funny skits on late night shows and primetime shows. After I watched Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, I looked up their telephone operator skit, which I'm pretty sure was improvised. And despite the fact that I have never lived in an age where I needed a telephone operator, I still found it hilarious. And then he directed a few plays, but all comedies. Like he was the first director, the inaugural director on The Odd Couple with Matthau and Art Garfunkel.
I didn't know that.
Sorry, not Art Garfunkel, Art Carney. I have Art Garfunkel on the brain because I watched another Mike Nichols movie, Catch-22, that Art Garfunkel is in. And then, yeah, so this was his first film debut, and it's got some funny stuff in it, but in service of this devastating portrayal of a couple that absolutely hates each other and pulls a younger couple into their destruction. What did you think of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Yeah, I mean, not only do they hate each other, I think they hate everybody. I mean, I think they have just been so destroyed by whatever's gone on in their life. Like, I don't think there's any joy left for them in anything or anyone. It's very well directed. It's very well acted. I mean, it's a powerhouse movie. It very much plays like a play. The locations are very limited. The cast is super limited, but I think it's excellent. It's very, very good. It's also very, very hard to get through. I mean, everything in it is super uncomfortable. Every scene in it is a fight. It's like being trapped in an elevator with a couple that's fighting and you can't escape from it. If you can, I mean, you could pause the movie and step away, but you don't really want to do that either. But they're so charismatic and they're so good at it. Like they get to each other so well, and they get to this other couple, the younger couple played by George Segal and Sandy Dennis, and then the older couple, of course, I haven't mentioned, played by Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, who are just electric in this movie. And both the couples are great. They play off each other so well. They play off the other couple so well. I mean, the casting here, just between the four of them and the chemistry here is, as good, I still think, as any, almost as any four-person cast, that I've seen to this day.
So this is sort of like this 4-person difficult content structure. We see it again and again. So God of Carnage, or Carnage as the movie is called. What's the movie? You were really into it. Mass? Is that what it's called?
Yes. Yep.
And then Closer, which was, I think, Mike Nichols' final movie. If not his last one, then one of his last ones. Maybe the Tom Hanks movie was his last one.
Yeah, Troy was 4 came after Closer. Yep.
But we see this over and over again, and it works really well here. One, it's funny, I was listening to the Big Picture podcast, and they were talking about His Three Daughters, which is another movie that has 4 people in it. They're not always the same 4 people. It's the 3 leads, and then like someone else will cycle in and out as the 4th person. And I heard, and the host Sean Fennessy described that as an Edward Albee-ish kind of play, and Edward Albee wrote Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the play that this movie is based on. But the reason it works is, unlike something like The Sunset Limited, which we've talked about on this podcast and I think is so great, you're not trapped in a dialogue between just 2 people. There's a different dynamic that you can switch to every once in a while, and this movie does that beautifully. So you've got like the beginning of the movie with Taylor and Burton, not like being nasty to each other, but immediately you know they don't like each other because Taylor wants Burton to remember, and this is a fun bit of trivia, Taylor wants Burton to help her remember what movie this Bette Davis line is from. Bette Davis was the original choice to play the wife in this movie, to play the Taylor role in this movie. And James Mason was supposed to play the Richard Burton role. And that's what Edward Albee wanted, but I don't think they thought they could market it as well with those 2 in the leads. Davis was past her prime. Taylor was like at the height of her popularity, and ironically her sexiness too. She gained a lot of weight to play this role. She put on old lady makeup to play this role. She's playing 20 years older than she is. They really wanted Bette Davis so that Bette Davis could say this line about Bette Davis in the movie. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. They're going at each other a little bit, but it's a regular argument. She's being a little mean to him and he's being a little dismissive of her, but it's not until she tells him that George Segal and Sandy Dennis are coming over that they really start going at each other. And then that provides them with other people to play off of. And I think that's really cool. I'm so glad you liked it, because I was a little worried that it would be kind of heavy and just like a downer. But I don't know. What do you think? Did they infuse enough laughs in it for you? Were there enough like funny barbs in it for you? You've said a few times that it was tough to get through.
Yeah, I mean, tough to get through, but in a way that was still interesting, just to watch them play off each other and to see where it went, like to see how they would take the stories. Like when George Segal, you mentioned they had the different dynamics, because at first, in some scenes you'd have the 4 of them together, and then the 2 women would go off one place, and then that would leave Richard Burton and George Segal, their characters, together. Then they would talk, and what they would talk about would come back later on in different ways. I thought that was just like really interesting, the way that would come back, and everybody played it so well. So yeah, definitely really interesting. I didn't laugh a whole lot. I don't know if it was maybe in the beginning, sort of, but like, once it started getting closer to the end, it was just like, man, it was just brutal. It just like, especially once they got past that restaurant, they go out and like go dancing, and like, yeah, pretty much everything after that was like, there's nothing funny about this anymore. But I don't say that as like a negative, really. I don't think like it's really intended to be funny at that point. At that point, I mean, I think the characters are feeling worn down by the effects of this evening. I mean, they've been drinking for the entire time. It was late at the time it started. I mean, it was like 2-3 in the morning, I think, by the time their evening even got started together. So they're exhausted, and I think it's okay that I was kind of feeling that way with the movie too. I was kind of coming along with the characters. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a great movie. If I say things like, that it was tough or it was, challenging, I mean that kind of as positives in its factor. I think it was intended to be those things.
Yeah, I think you can track it along with like how conscious is Sandy Dennis throughout the movie. So, I mean, she's already drunk when it starts, but she immediately gets very drunk. And then by the time things are really falling apart, she's passed out in the back of a car and then not really with it. Although it's funny. So I saw this for the first time pre-pandemic. I was on a date. Well, the date was in my apartment, and this woman was like, "Yeah, we should watch Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf." Not a great date movie. Really interesting that she suggested it. This woman is not my current wife. This was before I met my wife. And also it's interesting because this woman's interpretations of the movie I didn't see come through at all. So she, I think, interpreted Burton's character as being closeted, and that being a reflection on maybe some of like either Edward Albee or Mike Nichols being closeted. I don't think there's any evidence that either of those things are true or were true. Nichols was married like 4 times. Chiming in here from just a little bit in the future, I thought I had said this, but it turns out I didn't actually explicitly say it, that Edward Albee was gay, but Jake and I didn't find anything in the text or subtext of the movie that suggested that Richard Burton's character was. And Albee has gone on record a lot of times saying that there was nothing explicitly or implicitly about homosexuality in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf or in the Richard Burton character in the movie. Albee, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think for most of his life was not closeted. So that's a part of it as well. I know he didn't meet his partner until after he wrote Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but even still, I think it was widely known that he was gay. No, it seems much more that just like the Burton character is meant to be feeling completely castrated by his career and by his wife, because his, I don't know, are they nihilistic? His really dark ambitions for his career. You know, he wanted to write this book that was really grim, and the faculty didn't want him to. More specifically, his father-in-law wouldn't allow him to. And it just seems like he's like a artsy fartsy type trapped in a history professor's life, and that's not what he wants. And that's the ruin of everything. He had this ambition. Marrying the boss's wife or the boss's daughter was going to get him XYZ, and it didn't get him anything. You know, that's much more where I thought it was. And then they've created this imaginary life to torture each other. It seems a lot of this movie is about the projection of reality over reality, right? You've got these two things. You've got this imaginary son and these potentially imaginary dead parents. What do you think? What we got a little information at the very end of the movie about the son, but nothing really final about the parents. What do you think is real and not real in terms of these stories?
Well, the son, I guess, is not real. For the longest time, I thought that they actually had a son who died, and that's why he didn't want to talk about him. I didn't catch on for quite a while that the son was actually entirely made up. Like, really, until the end of the movie, I didn't catch on to that at all. I just thought it was that they had a son who had died, and that was maybe what had caused some of the fracture in their relationship, because that would be, that would certainly be a reason for a lot of the tension and the resentment between them. So that, that didn't really come across to me until the end. But I do think the son is definitely made up. As far as the dead parents, he wants to write the book about that, and it says that he may have that may actually have been real. I definitely don't think that that's real, not at all. I definitely think that that's something that she's projecting onto him to get at him. I definitely don't think that's real.
It's wild, like that's the majority. I don't know about the majority, but that's a huge part of the dialogue in the movie is about these two subjects. And then the Bergen thing, the kid who said Bergen, and then that comes back. She says it, outside of his conversation with Burton, and he gets really upset again. But what I think is so interesting is that they have rules regards these, made up figures in their lives, and they follow them. So, she could very easily, when he says the son is dead in their fantasy, she could ignore him, but they have a rule. And so she's devastated. She's completely put out. That was such a bizarre ending.
Yeah, it was. I can't imagine living a life this way. And having a relationship that functions this way, or does it function? Maybe that's the point, is that it's not functioning.
What do you think about Taylor's old lady makeup?
I mean, she still looks great. She's still Elizabeth Taylor.
I thought it was kind of obvious. I mean, old lady makeup and old man makeup now is obviously much better than it was then. But it really does feel like they put on plastic and squish it on people's faces in pre-millennium movies.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's like a product of its time. It looks as good as it would have looked. I mean, that's just what they were doing.
For sure. How do you feel like this movie would have been different had Davis and Mason been in the roles?
Boy, with Betty Davis, I feel like it would have even been I feel like it would have come across like even meaner. Like, I feel like she could have even been like even crueler, and I think it would have even been even harder to get to, because Elizabeth Taylor, there's some degree of sympathy I think that you have for her, because Richard Burton's he's pretty harsh too. I mean, they're cruel to each other, and they're pretty. I think they're on a pretty like even keel. Whereas I think Betty Davis, would have maybe eaten James Mason alive a little bit more. I think there might have been a different dynamic there, where I think like Burton and Taylor are more like their power dynamic is a little more equal. And I think, just in terms of where I picture them, as actors, Davis and Mason, I feel like maybe Betty Davis would have felt like that she was a little more, she would have dominated him a little bit more.
You should watch the movie Bigger Than Life, where Mason is abusing steroids and just becomes a monster. After watching that, I was like, yeah, he probably could have done. I mean, Burton is so much more like cutting and sarcastic, and the stuff I've only actually seen Richard Burton in a couple of movies. Obviously he and Davis had just done Cleopatra together, and that was big. They were Antony and Cleopatra, and I think that was a big part of them getting paired up here. The only other movie I haven't seen Cleopatra, and the only other movie I've seen Burton in is a movie called Candy, which is a sex comedy from around the same time. And he plays also a professor, but like a poetry professor who's like trying to mac on underage girls. Yeah, he's gross. And then I'm like, oh, that actually works here. Whereas Mason is so much more like button up and such a we think of him as such a like a theater guy. which is probably why they wanted him. But yeah, I think you're right. I think Betty Davis may have eaten his lunch.
That's a good way to put it. She would drink his milkshake. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
I do. I think it's great. I mean, I think for as far as debut films go, I mean, excellent, very, very good. Certainly lives up to its reputation. We can talk about this a little bit at the end too, but it was a major, major hit with the Oscars this year too. We'll talk about this a little at the end. Yeah, I think it holds up really well. I'm really glad I finally saw it.
Yeah, not a surprise that I didn't know that, but not surprising to me that it cleaned up at the Oscars. You gave me Michaelangelo Antonioni's Blowup. I'm going to let you talk all about it, but I just want to start by saying that this is the third Antonioni film I've seen, the second at your recommendation. I'm starting to get mad at you a little bit. I don't even dislike this movie. Actually, I think I like it more than you, actually. But
give it a higher rating.
Yeah, but I'm still mad. I'm mad at Antonioni and I'm mad at you. Tell us about Blowup and why you recommended it.
Okay, the reason I recommended it, number one, is that this was literally the only movie from '66 I had seen that you hadn't. So it was the only recommendation I could make. But aside from that, I remember seeing it, probably back when I was first becoming a film geek, because it has a reputation. It has a reputation as a classic. It's probably regarded as Antonioni's most famous, best movie. I know Roger Ebert wrote at length about it, and I was a big Ebert guy. I still am. I love Ebert. So I remember seeing it back in the day, probably like high school, early college or something, and I remember really liking it and thinking that it was very good. Again, it was the only one I could recommend, but I do remember thinking it was good, and I was eager to watch it again because it had been a long time since I had seen it. So yeah, I had no qualms with recommending it. But I didn't enjoy it as much as I remembered enjoying it. And for me, I've only seen two of his movies. I've seen this and The Passenger, and also I remember loving The Passenger and going nuts for it. And now I'm a little nervous about ever going back to it.
Yeah, so you recommend The Passenger was the other one you recommended for me. On my own, I watched Red Desert, which was Antonioni's movie just before Blowup, and they're all paced exactly the same. They're all real slow, real deliberate, really not about the thing that they're about, except for in fleeting moments. So tell us what this is about.
In the basest of terms, it's about a photographer who lives his life, bored, and I don't know if angry is the right word. I don't think he cares enough about anything to be angry, but he's just really bored with his life. He just goes around taking photographs, buying stuff he doesn't particularly need, kind of meandering around for a while, and then maybe at some point he's developing his photographs that he's taking, he's developing some pictures, and then he discovers that it's possible that maybe he might have photographed a murder. And that sounds like an awesome setup for a movie, right? Except that, like you said, the thing that the movie's about, it's only really about that for 20 minutes. And there's another hour and a half of movie all surrounding that. And it's really frustrating because when it is about what it's about, it's really cool. There's some undeniably cool things about this movie, like that sequence where he is developing the photos and it's cutting back and forth between his point of view and the photo, and it's doing that whole thing when he's developing it and he's kind of seeing what he sees in the photos for the first time. That's really neat, and there's some cool stuff there, and I like the ending. I like the kind of ambiguous hopelessness of the ending. I think that stuff is really cool, but there's just so much buildup of nothing going on in this movie. And we've talked about other movies where there's kind of slow buildups to it, but there's a difference between some of those other movies. We talked about recently, was a couple movies recently that have had this, and they came out a little bit after Blowup, and maybe it's just they were able to kind of do this style a little better. Deliverance was another movie that kind of had a slower build up to where they were getting, but number one, they didn't take as long to get there, and it was they were doing a few more interesting things along the way, the dueling banjo scene, or just the characters were a little bit more interesting. The problem with Blowup is that this character, like I said, he's bored, he's really just kind of disinterested in everything in his life. There's no stakes to anything here. If he discovers this guy is murdered or if he doesn't, nothing changes in his life, at all. So nothing really matters, in anything that's really going on. So, and that was kind of where I had the disconnect with this. It was kind of a disappointment from what I remembered. I definitely remembered liking it a lot more.
I love that you texted me and said, boy, Blowup's taking a long time to get going. And my response was, I got bad news.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yep.
So yeah, this is one where I'm glad that I waited. Usually I log my feelings on Letterboxd right away. I'm glad I waited a little bit because it let me think, okay, there's a little more going on here. You talked about it, the hopelessness of it, the ambiguity of it. I like those things, but I'm totally with you in that this movie for a long time, if it's about anything, it's not about whether or not this guy saw a murder. It's about whether or not anything is of value and whether or not anything that we perceive is real. So Yeah, he's not only is he bored and meandering, he's mean. He treats people like trash. Every model that he has, he treats like garbage. So he starts with this very famous model, Varushka von Lendorf, and she's mad because he made her wait. Then as he's photographing her, he's using her like an object instead of a person. He like mounts her at one point, and then takes some photos, and then walks away without saying anything to her, and that's the end. And then she says she's going to Paris, which actually becomes important later. And then these two girls show up at his studio and they want to be filmed. One, Jane Birkin in her debut, which I thought was very neat that we've done 2 Jane Birkin movies in pretty close succession. And he dismisses her like completely out of hand. He doesn't, and her friend, he doesn't want to talk to them. They come back later. He sleeps with them.
The weirdest like sequence. That's such an odd, uncomfortable sequence to watch too.
So I think that's a third thing that this movie has going on is it's even a commentary on, but just a reflection of like the swingin' 60s. So it starts with the first shot in the movie is this group of mimes driving around London. Mimes, right? They're wearing face paint. They're screaming, but then when they get to where they're going, they stop screaming and they're just asking for money and they're protesting stuff. And at the same time, we also see the London working class just like going about their business. So there's that juxtaposition. Our photographer guy is somewhere in between. He's working, but he's also just like sleeping around. Like you said, he's trying to get these projects off the ground, but there's no urgency to any of it. Then he goes to the park because he's trying to help some guy buy a store. And that's why when he buys the ore he doesn't need for $8. Propeller.
Oh, yeah,
they do the same thing. They make the ship go forward. He goes to the park. He takes the photographs that you were talking about. And then Vanessa Redgrave enters his life and tries to get him to give her the photos back. And then there's all this ambiguity. What were the photos of? Was it an affair? Was it a murder? We don't see this guy die. And all of the images that we see that suggest he might be dead are very blurry and like might be in the photographer's head. We should mention the photographer is played by David Hemmings, who I thought I'd never seen in anything else, but apparently I've seen like 1,000 things, and he just got very heavy as he got older. Yeah, like he's in Gangs of New York. He plays Schermerhorn, the avatar for fat cats.
Yeah, I assumed this was the only thing I'd seen him in too, and maybe I should have looked.
No, it's all good. He's in Barbarella, which I know you haven't seen, but he has like a pretty big role in that. He was in he died in the last 20 years, but he was in stuff. Yeah, big British career, big fat British career. A lot of the stuff we see in his photographs that suggests someone died, like a blurry hand holding maybe a gun. And is that the body lying in the ground? Like those things could be in his head. And even when he goes and sees the body in the park later in that day, we don't know it's real anymore because he's sort of in this cycle of weird stuff happening. Like he goes to a party to find his friend and he sees the model who says she's in Paris and she says she actually is in Paris. It either suggests that she's completely out of her mind high because his friend seems to be, or that his conception of reality is maybe up in the air. And I think that weird sex scene also sort of like plays into that. Because who would do that?
That's a fair question. Yeah. And those are the right questions to be asking. And I think all these things we're talking about here, a lot of these things went on, I think, to influence much better movies. Like I can see, it's a movie I haven't seen in a little while, but I kept thinking of like, oh, this kind of reminds me a little bit of The Conversation.
I was like, he has to be talking about The Conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like, but which I think is like a much, much better movie. But because there's a lot of stakes in that movie. Like in The Conversation, the Gene Hackman character, he like completely turns his life upside down. At the end of Blowup, I do kind of like I said, I like that ambiguity and that kind of thing where he's like, what really happened to me here? Like, did this guy really die or anything? But like, at the end of the day, is his life really changing? Probably not. I mean, like, there's really no discernible effect on his life. We know, whereas like in something like The Conversation, like there were these huge stakes and like the Hackman character like just really upended everything about his life and like mentally really like fell apart. Like just, very different movie, but like you can see echoes of that. And then, in a future episode too, we're going to talk about De Palma's Blowup or Blowout, obviously much more influenced by this movie too. So I think there's like, there are good things about Blowup. And like, I think there were things that maybe people took from this movie, were influenced by it. So in that sense, I think Blowup is an interesting movie and like a worthy one. It's just, watching it in 2024, yeah, not as thrilling as, it probably was in 1966.
Totally agree. And both of those guys, De Palma, I mean, he called it Blowout. I mean, it's obvious. And Francis Ford Coppola has said that Blowup was a huge influence on The Conversation. And you can see it in the ending where Hemmings comes back to his studio and the photos are gone. And were the photos ever there? We don't know. Whereas in The Conversation, Hackman comes back to his apartment and it's been completely torn apart. And it has been completely torn apart. Mm-hmm. And then he plays the saxophone or the clarinet as the movie ends in his
Excellent, I
trash
think,
moment. Yeah, I agree with you completely. It's one of these movies where it's important because of how influential it is, and is now only really celebrated by two kinds of people: film geeks who won't let things go, and that's pretty obnoxious, and people who were around at the time and are nostalgic for that whole vibe, which I think is totally fair.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, like I think if I had seen this movie and like, at the time it came out, like I think it was a totally cool, like kind of new and fresh thing. But yeah, made in 2024. Meh.
Yeah, there's I think Criterion released a documentary about the movie, and it's all just about photography and how cool it was to be around in the 60s. I mean, it's a bad documentary. I don't recommend watching it. Even they didn't talk about what makes the movie great.
I would like to have been around in the late 60s. Like I would have liked to have seen that time period. Yeah, that would have been
For
neat.
sure. Okay, so let's talk Oscars.
Yeah, a couple of big ones. Both these movies actually did fairly well at the Oscars. Blow Up only had 2 nominations, but they were big ones because it was nominated. Antonioni got or the international director slot that year. He was nominated for Best Director for this, and then he was also nominated for original screenplay for this. Didn't win either of them, but still, for this international film to get those 2 nominations is pretty good. On the other hand, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf nearly set the record. It was nominated for 13 Academy Awards, and it won 5 of them. Elizabeth Taylor, Best Actress in a Leading Role. Sandy Dennis, Best Actress in a Supporting Role. As Best Cinematography, Black and White. This was also when they had, I should say, with those 13 nominations, they were separating categories like cinematography, art direction, costume design. Those were separated into color and black and white films. But it did win cinematography, art direction, and costume design for all black and white. So the 2 actresses and cinematography, art direction, costume design won all of those, and then was also nominated for Best Picture, Actor in a Leading Role, Richard Burton, Actor in a Supporting Role, George Segal, Best Director, Mike Nichols, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, and Best Original Score. Quite a night for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I mean, going 5 for 13 is that's outstanding. Yeah.
Let's rank our 1966 movies. So you have what, a top 3?
I have a top 3. That's it, yeah. But I like all 3 of the movies, at least. Like, I feel comfortable ranking them. So
give us the Triple Crown.
I'll give you the Triple Crown. My number 3 is Batman, the movie, which came out that year, which I think is, I mean, it's a lot of fun. I mean, you know what? It just is. Adam West is great. It is enjoyable. My number 2 is Blow Up, which we talked about, which I think it has its issues, but I still think, it's a worthwhile movie. And if you are a serious film geek, you should probably see it at least once. And then my number 1, easy choice, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Tell me why so did The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly not come out in America until 1967?
Never did it. I've never seen that trilogy.
You've never seen any of them? Wait, have you seen Once Upon a Time in the West? Are you telling me that the only Sergio Leone movie you've ever seen is Once Upon a Time in America? What's happening right now? That's crazy. Okay, well, here we go.
I know. I'm not proud of it.
Okay, I'm going to do mine now because I don't know what to make of that. I have 3 honorable mentions. Well, really just 2, because we already covered the Battle of Algiers, and it came out in the States after this, but it came out in France in 66. So my 2 real honorable mentions are The Fortune Cookie, which is the first time that Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau got together. It's pretty fun. Lemmon plays a sports cameraman, a football cameraman who gets tackled on the sidelines and hospitalized, and Matthau plays his shyster lawyer brother-in-law who tries to get him a lot of money.
That sounds fun. I never knew what that movie was about.
Yeah, it's fun. And fun fact that we learned when we had the Random Acts of Cinema guys on our podcast, or maybe when we did their podcast, it has the same set as The Apartment, which is pretty cool.
Right. Yeah, I forgot that.
And then my other honorable mention is Blow Up, which I don't like as much as the Batman movie, which I'll get to in a second. My number 5 of my top 5 is Seconds. This is a really cool movie. It's a John Frankenheimer thriller it's another movie about what's real, what's not real, paranoid thriller, really indicative of the kind of movies that people are interested in making at the time. It reminded me a lot of, it's not a political thriller, but same kind of vibe as The Manchurian Candidate, where it's just how much of this is just me being paranoid. Yeah, very cool. Highly recommend. Stars Rock Hudson. And I think it's the only Rock Hudson movie I've ever seen. Fun for me in that regard. My number 4 is the Batman movie. So just a little more info on this. It's Adam West's Batman. Adam West and Burt Ward. It's based off of the TV show that was on around the same time. And yeah, it's so much fun. Adam West carries a giant cartoon bomb to the water. They're shark repellent. I mean, so many like Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah, shark repellent spray. It's got Cesar Romero as the Joker with his mustache just painted over. It's got Burgess Meredith as the Penguin, Eartha Kitt as Catwoman. I mean, this is a great movie. The UN, but not the UN. They're called something else. And it's not the League of Nations either. It's a fake name. Get dehydrated and turn to dust. And Adam West, and Batman and Robin have to rehydrate them. It's great. They have to get the fluids from the bad guys. Catwoman, Penguin, Joker, and Riddler team up. It's, oh my God. I'm just thinking about the way, the riddle that Adam West does to realize that it's the 4 villains all together. And at one point they're like, and this caper happened at C. C stands for Catwoman. This is the best movie of all time.
Adam West, man. I mean, R.I.P., man. What a gift.
For real. So I actually think the movie's a little, even though you have it in your top 3, I think it's a little better than you give it credit for because it is better than Blow Up. At least it's like a movie watching experience. My number 3 is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. If you can handle watching people be terrible to each other for 2 hours, I highly recommend it. It actually goes by pretty fast, especially compared to other Mike Nichols movies. You know, he's done a lot of tough movies. I just watched Wit, which I know you love.
Yeah.
That's a rough one. You mentioned, earlier in this episode, you mentioned Emma Thompson is kind of flighty and whatever in the Harry Potter movies. Anything but in Wit, she's fighting cancer the whole time.
Devastating. I mean, she's so good in that. Yeah.
Yeah, hell of a movie. Remember when HBO used to make like cool concept movies?
Yeah.
Be nice if they brought that back.
I would love it. Yeah.
Number 2 is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly because I've seen it. It's great. So it's okay. You should see it though. Speaking of,
I know.
It's much funnier than people realize. Like, this is the one where Eastwood is like lightening up a bit. It takes place during the Civil War, and it's about people who don't care about the Civil War. It's great. Like, the Civil War just sort of like is a problem from them for time to time, but they're looking for treasure. It's really great. Everyone in it is wonderful. It's got a little brown face because, that was the time. Eli Wallach playing a Mexican, Lee Van Cleef playing a bastard. Amazing movie. And then my number 1, I think I had actually recommended this for you first, but I thought there might be more to talk about with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, is Ingmar Bergman's Persona, which is another one I think you should see immediately. So this whole movie is basically just Bibi Andersson and Liv Ullmann at each other, and you wondering which one of them, if either, are real. Jake, you and I once did a watch together thing of Enemy, of Denis Villeneuve's Enemy, which is the male version of Persona.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. The movies are very different, but this one's like a little slower, a little quieter. It's like 2 women on a beach trying to figure out if they're real. Also, this one's, I would say it's much more sexual, but there's a decent amount of sex stuff going on in Enemy. Very cool movie. My favorite movie of 1966. All right, so that'll do it for this week. I know we had teased earlier that 1989 was coming up soon. It's actually coming up next week. We're actually doing it next week. We've got Kevin Ford coming back to do a special wrestling episode. We're doing, I was going to say Over the Top. We're not. We're doing No Holds Barred. And we're doing Woody Allen's Crimes and Misdemeanors, and we're shoehorning in another fun new wrestling miniseries that just came out. So come back next week.